So with that, I'm going to go ahead and call on people who have signed up to speak. First of all, I have John Norcross, Oconomowoc, and he is a resident of the HS district and is a family member of a current AHS student. John?
Yes, thank you. Two, in fact.
Two, okay.
And just a lot of good news. The time is, for me anyways, ticked by quite quickly. A lot of good news to hear. And any efforts to honor our veterans warms my heart. My granddad was in the Royal Air Force. My father was in the Royal Marines. And I think these are great services to honor. So thank you for sharing the stories. I'm here again to talk about Policy 333, and I'm going based on what I read the last time I spoke, off-piste, as I said, it was an impromptu talk. And, given all the good news that we've heard today, this evening, there are some standards to live up to preserve, and non-discrimination is a very important one. But in that policy document, we read that there was something at the end around critical race theory. And it's for this reason that I think this is bad policy. I want to give you 5 brief reasons why. One, the whole issue of CRT, which will always be cathode ray tubes to me, is manufactured outrage in my opinion. It is a non-issue. This is something that only came up in September of 2020, so happy outrage anniversary, belatedly. It's also poorly defined, and I know that the committee considering this policy struggled with that notion. How are we going to define this? What are we even looking for? And so that in itself is a flag to say this is probably not something we should be entertaining. And it's because of that poor definition that it's become very difficult for teachers and educators to do their jobs. They are looking over their shoulders, second-guessing themselves, wondering, is somebody going to be calling me out on this? Is this the right way of approaching this topic? And I would ask you to think about the impact on the educators. But we don't want to see a return to a McCarthyism again. For what it's worth, and I know that you put what purchase in it as you will, but our niche.com rating was straight A's except for a C in diversity. I know that's difficult to impact. I recognize that. There's a lot of things that are out of our control. But this policy isn't going to help it. It might even hurt it. It might drop down to a D. Who knows? And then fifthly, it is a distraction. I mean, there is real discrimination. There are real issues to be focused on. And I mean that as a parent and as a community member. There is real racism to tackle. There's real homophobia. If we're going to crack open this policy, I would encourage you to explore adding sexual orientation or gender identity to the list of protected categories. But I do not think that this is the right policy. I haven't seen the way it looks since I last read it. I don't know if it has changed, and I know we will hear more about that later on. But thank you.
Thank you, John. And thank you for your service from your family with the English. Our allies. Gabe Lucas, also a resident of Arrowhead and parent of a current student and future student or students.
Hi, thank you. My name is Gabe Lucas. I have 2 kids in the district. In preparation for tonight's meeting, I reviewed Policy 333. As you know, line 3 of this policy prohibits the teaching of critical race theory. The definition of this term is not necessarily agreed upon by all. Depending on this definition, the intent of line 3 could be interpreted to open the door to censorship of the district's curriculum to omit or downplay historical instances of racial oppression. This is a picture of my grandpa, Walter Tanaka. He fought for the United States in World War II. Meanwhile, the same country that he was fighting to defend arrested and imprisoned his parents and siblings for 4 years, along with over 120,000 other Japanese Americans. They never recovered what they lost in those 4 years of imprisonment. This was in the 1940s, it's not ancient history. This is one of the many historical topics that could be brushed under the rug and trivialized for tomorrow's students using line 3 of this new policy as justification. In Germany, it's required by law that all public school students are taught about the Holocaust. They're taught that it really did happen and that it was a horrible evil that should never be repeated. It doesn't imply that the students themselves should be at fault for the Holocaust, but omitting it from the education would be irresponsible. This may be an extreme example, but we also need to educate our youth about the less than flattering parts of our nation's history. As it's currently written, line 3 prohibits CRT without actually defining what CRT means. It leaves the definition open to interpretation. It leaves the door open to prohibit our students from learning from the mistakes and faults of those that came before us. Line 3 should be eliminated, but if it is to stay in the policy, it needs to we need to specifically define what critical race theory is, and that this policy should not and cannot erase the dark parts of American or world history. My grandpa, who fought for our freedom, along with his descendants, and anyone else with the potential to be oppressed or exploited, deserve this. Thanks.
Thank you, Gabe. Tiffany Lucas, also a resident and same thing, or a parent of future AHS students. Tiffany?
Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. And Ken, we actually met when my mom was on the honor flight and I was a guardian. And she loved the letter. She thought it was so exciting. She got one full of glitter and was very excited. So thank you for that. My family didn't have the same World War II experience as my husband's family. My German immigrant ancestors weren't put in internment camps. In fact, I have a long military history in my family dating back to the Revolutionary War. But again, looking at the critical race theory of line 3, I had to look up the definition, and I was interested to see that Derek Bell, who was one of the founders of the critical race theory, the Harvard University law professor, argued at the Brown versus Board of Education, which was, as you know, the Supreme Court law in 1954, which overturned the Plessy-Ferguson case of 1896, which said separate but equal. And the reason he got that to pass was because he argued that former soldiers who fought bravely for our country in World War II were now expected to return to lives of oppression and exploitation. And so if we look at the basis of critical race theory, why it was started, to say that our soldiers, my ancestors, my husband's ancestors, should not be subjected to racism and oppression after they serve their duty for our country, that's what's so critical about critical race theory. And as my husband said, it's not ancient history. My daughter received anti-Asian text messages from friends just last year. And it was heartbreaking to go through the anti-Asian discrimination that our family went through last year as students in this district. This needs to be part of the conversation. We need to feel welcome in this community. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany. Kim Curry, also a resident and a number of both current and future students.
Two future students.
Two future.
Just really quick on the critical race theory, I think I agree with both the speakers. I do think the verbiage is not clear and it should be very defined. I am not for CRT because on one side, I don't agree with omitting history at all. I do believe the bad, the ugly should be taught. But the other side, critical race theory, and for the Asian Americans, Harvard, critical race theory identifies Asians as white adjacents. And if you look at Harvard University and what they're currently doing there.
Kim, can you address the board, please?
Yes. So what Harvard University is doing, because under critical race theory, Asians are considered white adjacents. And they are limiting them from being able to apply because they're picking diversity candidates outside of the Asian race because they make a large majority of the population in Harvard. That is in literature, you can read it, it's happening today, it's happening last year. So critical race theory can take multiple turns. And so where I agree with some of the speakers is the teacher's lens is where this can go wrong and how far people can take it. And I believe history should be taught. I believe the Civil Rights Act is something we should be teaching our children because that is anti-racism, I think in the purest form. And outside of that, I don't think teachers should be going any further than that. That's my word on critical race theory. I had the opportunity to sit here and listen through Laura's report. It seems like a very large broken record from last year. What Laura has not mentioned in terms of absences and what has happened is we masked and we put layered mitigation into the communities. And we did not allow people for a long period of time to interact with one another, okay? So we did all these things, and then we did a lot of hand washing and sanitizing, and that creates something called immune suppression. I have a very close family member and neighbor that works at Children's Hospital, and he's an ER physician. They are seeing over a 450% increase in RSV this year and other respiratory viruses that did not happen last year. And quite frankly, COVID is the least amount of their problems at the moment. So, you know, when you talk about mitigation and masking, what you're not talking about is it's going to come back. Viruses are cyclical, they're cycles. And what you're seeing is ebbing and flowing. And that can go back hundreds of years. And the second piece here is I've worked with masks for 25 years. I've been in healthcare, and I get them through the 510K FDA process. And masks do not filter particulates if they're cloth or surgical. And it's fit, function, and saturation levels. And I'm not going to get into the science because I sent it all to you. So I just disagree completely. The other area I wanted to ask is, and I don't know, Kent, if you can answer this, or if there's an answer, but what did you do for the flu and the measles and any other outbreak that can happen? What was the plan? Is there a plan? Excuse me, but the vaccine is not neutralizing antibodies. You can have it and spread it, and it's in your nasal passages. It's on the CDC website. You can read it. So the measles and all these other vaccines are different, and they actually are neutralizing antibodies. So you have a very misrepresentation of what the vaccine can and cannot do.
So what I can share is what the health department shared with us. COVID is new, so there's no set percentage. As superintendents in our county, when we meet every week with the health department director, we've been asking, what is that cutoff? What is that threshold? What should we use? COVID is new, so there isn't a predetermined percentage of illness cases, you should close school. What the health director explained was each disease would be different. So for instance, the measles, highly contagious. He said the measles, it could be if 2 to 3 or 4% of your school population has the measles, you need to shut down. Like 40 students at Arrowhead, that would be a lot of measles cases. He said the typical flu, that might be 15 or 20%. If you have 15 or 20% of your school population has influenza, you should probably shut down. They don't have a set number for COVID, and so that's why you see districts using 3%, 5%, 10% around this area. And like here at Arrowhead, we don't know how many students that are out ill every day on an average of 74. We don't know how many of those have COVID, how many it's a cold, how many it's a flu. We're seeing more disease spread regardless of what it is. So that's, I know it doesn't completely answer your question,
No,
but
it
in
does,
terms of what
actually.
the health department shares, it's disease specific on what they would recommend for a percentage.
Well, that makes sense, because the flu is a respiratory virus, as is COVID, so probably is very much in the same. They're animal reservoir viruses, and they actually transmit in a very similar way, so it probably should be handled very similar to how you would handle the flu. And if we didn't bring masks back for the flu, why would we bring masks back for COVID? The opportunity to get to COVID zero is not going to happen, okay? So let's just all understand that. It's something that we're going to live with. It's going to be, or it is an endemic. Places like Spain and other countries are treating it as the flu. We here are not, because it's become way too politicized. And it has to stop, because at the end of the day, what you also didn't mention is the mental health of our children. And again, just like you talked about those 20,000 absences, there are several families here at Arrowhead that their children were diagnosed with clinical depression last year from having to be out of school, close contact quarantines, and masking. And they couldn't come to school and wear a mask, or they couldn't wear a mask during sports, and they quit. And these were Division I athletes that stopped everything. And you know what that turns to? Drug abuse. So I think this board has a lot to think about.
Thank you, Kim. Tim Evers, also a resident of Arrowhead and a future students.
Yep, 2 future students. My first one will be here in a little over a year and a half. He's 7th right now. So I've been attending board meetings here and at the feeder schools now religiously since June. And as seen in recent meetings, the transparency and the ability for this board to speak openly to the parents and the public, in my opinion, has been unacceptable and inexcusable. The lack of and limited one-way only conversations between the public and the board is creating a divisive, non-productive atmosphere. To drive change and establish a better community representation, I request a policy change and hopefully a future motion to adopt a Merton School Board style approach of a community session where we actually have two-way dialogue back and forth and can have a healthy debate, healthy conversation to work through and break down some of the issues that we're talking about. I think a good session on even developing a united COVID mitigation policy with input and direct two-way conversation with the public would be fantastic. Continue the discussion on CRT back and forth with the public would be great. So again, I propose that as something for this board to consider. If it can be done at the Merton School, it can absolutely be done here as well with the policy change and different procedures around it. Moving on to the COVID mitigation, I want to just say real quickly that coronavirus is not new. Coronavirus has actually been defined in medical reference and handbooks since the late 1990s as the common cold. It is not new. We should treat it like a common cold or a flu, much like what Kim suggested earlier. But I also want to go on and say, shown through recent precedent-setting cases, school boards and the school does not have the right or the authority to make or enforce a mask mandate. Do not encroach on our civil liberties as protected by our Constitution and the flag that we just pledged allegiance to just minutes ago. I strongly urge that you strike the mask portion from the proposal and use other proven mitigation steps. The public, and when I say public, our community has rejected masks here locally, and they know that because it's not based on science. The mask has been based on fraud, fear, and control. Majority of the disposable masks that you can see either administered here or throughout the community or even buy online actually say on the box that they do not prevent or protect from the COVID virus. Further, you may also have seen here recently in the news that the FDA has recently released that the PCR test, the test that we use to determine if our kids or us are positive or negative of COVID, is actually not based on an isolated COVID case, meaning that they have no way to tell with 100% certainty that a positive or negative case is actual factual or not. Additionally, there have been over 800,000 test kits that have been proven to be providing false positives. So based off of that, I think we're also reacting to statistics that is not founded in something that can be backed up with facts based off of the foundation that they are from fraudulent test kits or they have not been utilizing the isolated virus. So I encourage this board to amend the proposal that we would use or return to masks for a set period of time. That sounds an awful lot like 14 days to flatten the curve, and we all know that that did not go as originally planned. Additionally, if this board accepts the plan as written, I recommend that everyone here makes their decisions on their own and use your own informed consent and decide whether or not you would comply with another mask mandate. I, for one, will not. My kids will not. I know they don't go to school here, but I also think that what is done here at Arrowhead will trickle to the feeder schools as well. So I strongly encourage to not include mandatory masks again. You may also think that it's just a mask. It is more than a mask, as Kim stated. The masks have a lasting effect on the health and well-being of our kids. I can see a change in just the dynamic and the healthiness from an emotional standpoint of my kids when Heartland dropped the mask mandate for the school that they attend. Night and day difference. We cannot return to mask mandates for our kid, even if it's 10 days. It won't just be 10 days because it'll come back. I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Marie Simonson. Also a resident and future students.
I have two students here currently. So Laura, you shared a lot of number crunching, and as previous parents had mentioned, there is a night and day difference this school year versus last school year. You know, you look at how excited my kids are to come to school. Participation in homecoming, Spirit Week was above and beyond what I had seen them do previously. And you need to share that their excitement to come to school, participate in labs in the classroom, share stories with their teachers, come home and tell me about what their teacher said. Seeing their teachers out and about in the grocery store, they can see who they are and when they recognize them. I mean, these aren't things that we could talk about last year. I picked my son up from school, and he tells me about the great things that happened during the day at school. Did not happen last year. So similar to go back to masks for COVID mitigation, I am not for it. My kids will not be for it. They will not be wearing a mask if that occurs. You had mentioned, Laura, in your board meeting for the week of the October 4th through the 8th, that you would be seeking local feedback. If there's a plan, this is my feedback today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Marie. Neil Palmquist?
Yeah, that's a mistake, you can scratch
Got
it.
you? All right. Nicole Oberst, not a resident and does have a family member at Arrowhead.
I'm a sophomore, he's one of the 230 open enrolled, and I have 3 more in the pipeline, so. I'm getting a reputation for the dorky chart lady, but I did bring handouts. But I found that people like data, so they don't want my opinion.
Haven't heard the term dorky in a while.
Yeah, well, sometimes you gotta own it.
Thank you.
Okay. So, the point of my dorky charts was basically to say, and I think Laura did say this during her discussion as well, but sometimes it's nice to see it laid out. My first sheet is basically showing Arrowhead and all the feeder schools. I pulled their numbers, so these are all up to date when I checked earlier today. So my top Arrowhead number is a little bit off because I think I checked before it had been updated, but and the enrollment is a little bit off because you just updated that as well, but it doesn't change it, the math, it doesn't change it very much. So, but basically, if you look at all this, a lot of the schools less than 5, so you're kind of left wondering, is it 1, is it 2, is it 3, or 4? So I did run some different scenarios, but ultimately for the whole district at large, we're sitting at about a 0.42% to as high as a 0.71% infection rate of tested positive COVID students. Not alarming numbers, and I don't think anybody feels it's alarming, but I also, having this mitigation plan in place, to possibly get this grant money is concerning to a lot of the parents, I think, because why are we talking about it? If these are our numbers and this is not seeming like an issue. And I ran these numbers a few weeks ago, I think September 27th, and we had a 46% drop from September 27th to these numbers now, with no masks. So Oconomowoc having a 40% drop in these classrooms that they slapped masks back on these kids, and they saw a 40% improvement in their rate. Well, so did we. It didn't have anything to do with the mask, most likely. Kind of going back to what Kim said about these illnesses being cycles. You know, we're probably going to see it do this all year round, and I'm assuming if we were keeping track of these numbers before we were told to or needed to, this happened most cold and flu seasons, where you would see it come in waves and cycles. The next page was just a little, I had saved an email from last October. I think Laura had sent one out with, before we were doing like that dashboard or whatever, before we were kind of updating parents as it became necessary. And October 2nd, 2020, there were 23 COVID cases at Arrowhead. And, you know, this week now we're at 6 or whatever. That's when masks, most of the students, I mean, we were requiring masks, so everybody in person was masked, and we still had 23 cases. And I also think that what we're not touching on as well when you talk about spread and contact tracing and such, at that time, we only had 64% of our students in the classroom. We had virtual students at home, not even in the classroom with these other kids. So we had less students in the building wearing masks all day, and we still had more cases of COVID week compared to week this year to last year. Less students, masks, spreading, spaced out at the lunch tables, more cases. This year, mask optional, more students in the building, enrollment is up, and we're not really seeing an alarming rise. So I think that is a fair argument that we don't need to be worried about masks working or not. I also don't think that none of these data points show how sick these kids really are. You know, I'm not hearing of anybody being hospitalized or really all that ill, so that's one thing to keep in mind as well. Did I touch on my points? I don't have any other dorky charts, but I think Kim said a lot of this stuff about RSV being up. I think using illness as benchmark as opposed to specifically talking about COVID like we had to do all last year, we're just making it general illness. It's too all-encompassing. I mean, I don't know, I was a teenager, sometimes I woke up and I'm just like, my stomach hurts, and I didn't go to school, and enough kids do that one day and masks come back, it just doesn't seem like a good plan. I also I don't know, I know you have to talk about liability, but from what I've heard and from what I've seen, there is no way any of that would hold up. You can't tell where a child got COVID from. You know, right now they're going to football games, they're going to sports, whether it be at Arrowhead or other places. It's a community issue, it is not a school issue. And I think as adults and as teachers and administrators, to put a community issue on the shoulders of our students is irresponsible, and I think it's sending an unfair message. So basically my message is, I work in early childhood, I know about grants, I've applied for them often. It's hard to turn away money, but I think right now our main takeaway needs to be no money for mitigation. We just need to let it go, unfortunately. That's it, thank you.
Thank you very much. All very good comments, and thank you for your input. Yes, sir.
Are you willing to take one more comment?
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir.
Can I get your name, sir? Can I get your name?
My name is Joseph Shardle, and I lived in the district for 30 years plus. Thank you for all the hard work you do for the students in our district, and thank you, citizens, for making your thoughts known. I think this is a wonderful forum that demonstrates the liberties that we have in this country. Because back in the day, George tried to take those liberties away from us and tried to put the screws to us, right? Mandating that we do things. And there's something within us that rebels against that. That it is the hill that we will die on, literally. So, when this COVID thing started to arise, say 2 years ago, a quote came to my mind from one of our past presidents. It goes something like this: "A government's rightful and good function is to protect us from each other. But government goes awry, it errs, when it tries to protect us from ourselves." Now, I had to chew on that a little bit. What is an example of the government trying to protect me from myself? Well, how about a seatbelt law? How about a helmet law? How about a mask law? Now, I wear my seatbelt, not because George told me to, or Uncle Sam, or anybody else. I wear a seatbelt because it makes sense to me. I have looked at the evidence that the government has provided to me in their expertise. I've looked at contrary views, and I've critically thumped my way through it and decided that it's in my best interest to wear a seatbelt, and thus I do. And I wear a helmet when I ride my motorcycles sometimes. Now, regarding the mask, I also wear a mask under certain circumstances. I wore masks under circumstances prior to when we could spell COVID. It just makes sense. It's a good device for certain functions. And I think it works well. I mean, if you ever talk to somebody in sunshine where you can see the light coming through, there's all kinds of spittle and stuff that is exchanged with someone who's within, say, 2 feet of you, okay? So masks help stop that. And I understand that a virus passes through it like a cyclone fence. I get that. I'm just saying that they have a place. And here's the whole point of this thing, and it's an offering of perhaps a tool a principle that might guide your decision making. And that is, if the government or the board comes to me and says that, our experts have looked at this and the best data out there available says that concludes with this set of recommendations. And so if you come to me and you say, we recommend that you do this for all these great reasons, I will seriously consider that. But if you come to me and you tell me, thou shalt wear a mask, I'm going to throw you in the ocean right next to George. You are not going to tell me what to do. Okay? There's something within us. So as a peaceful advice, if you want to mellow this out and not stir up the hornet's nest, I would suggest that you frame it in terms of a suggestion or a recommendation. And that gives room for, some of us among here are pretty we choose to wear a mask, and we choose to protect ourselves, and we choose to, listen to the letter of the law, and maybe even go beyond. That's their freedom to do so, and I would be the first one to protect them. But there might be others who are, want to ride their motorcycle 100 miles an hour with no helmet. Well, I think Darwin effect will help. It's like a self-correcting problem. So I'll just leave that with you. I think a recommendation would be much more palatable to the general public.
Very briefly, it's John, not George. I'm sorry for all the tyranny. I'm just jealous of the accent.
Thank you, Joseph, and thank you for the levity. And I always wore my helmet because I promised my wife I would. Anyway, thank you. Yes, Bob. Mr. Lemon.
I wasn't planning on speaking.
I was hoping you would, actually, because you are certainly verbose in other scenarios.
I'm a vocal person, yeah, you're right. I wasn't planning on speaking, but I wanted to address the CRT comments. I was listening to the first few people commenting on CRT, and I'm thinking, Well, you're sitting in the same place that I'm sitting at. I'm a first generation, proud American, stand up for the flag, hold my hand on my heart. And I tell my son history. I don't hide history to my son. He knows the stories about my family, how they were knocked out of their country, where my aunt was forced into a coal mine, into a labor camp, and then they had to walk through a farm field to get to a building that was just made of slats in winter, and they could see through the slats, and the women would be all huddled together to stay warm at night, and they would wake up in the morning to see who died in their sleep. He knows that history. He also knows history as they were walking back through that farm field of cabbage that had just been picked, and there were leaves laying there, cabbage leaves laying there on the ground, and my aunt and her girlfriend were walking through this to go back to their camp, and she said, Eva, I'm going to pick up that leaf so we have something to eat. And she said, don't, the guards are right there, they'll shoot you. She didn't listen to my aunt. My aunt's friend picked up that leaf, and that, at that very moment, the guard shot my aunt's friend. And my aunt had to keep walking. This is not the history we're trying to hide. I mean, this is real. I hear the stories of what Joey, my son, is being taught here at school. And what I can tell, they're all factual. I think there's some misconception here that I do hear other stories where there's classes with BLM projects, and we're not talking about Black Lives Matter, we're talking about the organization Black Lives Matter, and other topics where other teachers are helping kids organize other protests. I don't think that's a place for the school, and I think that's where the CRT problem comes in. It's not the teaching of the history that I heard from the atrocities to the Japanese people in World War II. I know those stories. That was terrible. Those stories we have to tell to our kids. But we can't tell kids that we have white guilt, that we have some other thing that's been created that doesn't exist. Real history needs to exist. The history that's being brought in that is not real doesn't need a place in a public school. And it's, when I gotta say, when I heard these first few people speak about CRT, I can't disagree with them. It can't be hidden. It's got to be taught. I think there's some misconception what CRT is, and that needs to be defined. And I don't know, if we've really clearly defined it in the student policy that we're going to talk about tonight, but real history needs to stay in school. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. And I don't think we disagree with history needs to be taught. I think the difference is we shouldn't be advocating certain things, not barring discussion, but shouldn't be advocating for some of the things that we've heard. And I hope that's not going on. Thank you.
I agree. You're welcome.
Okay,
Is there time for one more comment?
Sure. Can I have your name?
Steve Rice.
Steve.
This is my first time here. I was invited by a friend, and several of these people in this room actually know me for some things that I do in Pewaukee at the beach. I believe that unity in the schools and people getting along and getting together with each other and knowing how each other are feeling is very important in the school systems. And this mask mandate that wants to be set should not happen because children from kindergarten on up to seniors, those masks are worn, cannot see the emotions in each other's faces, cannot see the emotions in their teachers' faces. And I am feeling very emotional about what I am saying right now because I want to know that the children in these schools aren't depressed because they can't see their friends' faces and have to depend on just looking at their eyes. That's pretty much it. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
I think we have two.
Okay, so what do we do?
Okay.
Thanks. Can I have your name, sir?
Sure, it's Todd Jones. I have
Todd.
one child at Arrowhead, one coming. So real quick, if I could ask one question, the ESSER grants, are those under like the CARES Act or something along those lines?
It is, it's the school type of federal grant,
Okay.
like other federal
Which
grants.
which is fine. I just, it was interesting that it was, talked about at the same time we were talking about COVID. And I'd just be careful about making mitigation strategies that are linked to things like grants that frankly, especially federal grants, people like us, people in the Arrowhead district, our taxes are gonna go up because of those. Our kids, our children, our grandchildren are gonna be paying for those. So I don't like doing things because you get a gun put to your head on something like that.
Amen.
So the other thing, and the funny thing is, I think most of us here, or all of us here, have the same thing in mind, which is keeping our kids in school. So I say, yes, we want to keep our kids in school. I just think when it comes to the metrics we're looking at, so if the metric is about illness, as opposed to COVID, and again, we got to live with COVID, but the metric is illness. I work in the corporate world, right? We tell people now, different world. If you got a cold, stay at home. If you got a cough, stay at home, because who knows what it could or couldn't be. So if we're going to use a metric like that, I just think that that's erroneous. And I think to say that people are just not getting their kids tested because they don't want them to say that they have COVID, you just can't jump to that conclusion. I also then will go with the mitigation technique then that we were trying to use to keep the kids in school based on those metrics. Masking doesn't work, and it's interesting. I only heard once, and we can argue about the efficacy of vaccinations a lot, right? I only heard once you talk about what the vaccinations were for the children in our school. Well, if you look at the CDC, the be-all and end-all is about vaccination. So I asked why vaccination and why masks, and especially when masks don't work. Okay, and then I'll go back to what somebody else was talking about as well. I do think this is a family choice as far as whether you wear masks or not. You said 1% to 2% are wearing masks right now in school. That's a choice of 98 to 99% of people not to wear them right now. And it's the kids, young adults, as well as the families that are making those choices. So again, thank you for what you're trying to do to keep our kids in school. We can all agree on that. I just, again, think the numbers that we're using, the techniques that we're talking on mitigation, I think we should put more thought into that. So thank you.
Sir, would you mind coming back for just a minute?
Oh, sure.
I have a quick question. I just need to frame it in this way.
Yep.
And perhaps you can speak for, the public. We hear these comments all the time, and we take them to heart. I'm really new in this, so I'm really trying to understand and make my way through and navigate. It is a deeply personal issue. If masking mitigation strategy does not go into effect, your comment was the end goal is to keep our kids in school.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what if we reach critical numbers that are beyond 10, beyond 15?
Can you define what a critical number is?
I can't,
Okay.
and I wonder if the DPI or the local health person, let me just finish my question. So at some point, it goes beyond the school board and even perhaps beyond the superintendent's decision. The state health department can come in and say your numbers are excessive, we will now shut the school down. So my question to you is, in your effort to have your end goal be, we're going to keep the school open, can not having a mitigation strategy in place deny us that end game?
Well, so first of all, I'd say DPI, any local health departments, first you'd have to believe that they're non-political. They're not non-political, okay? They just aren't. And so the politics in this is always going to be, significant. In mitigation, tell me what mitigation is. Masking, especially cloth masks, they don't work, okay?
But all I'm saying is, when you reach a critical level that some other governing body deems excessive, and they step in and say, this is excessive, we will now close the
And
school.
I'd ask on what math? Because I would suggest that everything that's ever been said about COVID, people have been wrong on all sides. And so for one side to say that it's going to be better as opposed to the other, or what that critical mass is, I don't know what those numbers are, okay? I believe Kim. I believe what Kim said. This is endemic. We're going to have to live with it.
Yes.
And so, you know, I brought up vaccinations. Not everybody agrees on vaccine. I'm vaccinated, okay? I went and got that. Why should I have to wear a mask in those situations? Proven mitigation technique that doesn't work. I think you can look at vaccinations and say, yes, it does. And does it work all the time? No. Okay, there are the breakthrough cases that people will breathlessly talk about, as opposed to that it's still so much smaller than anything else. But I'm talking about, I think the metric's wrong, and I think the mitigation technique that we're talking about is wrong. If we get those, and do I know what those are? No, but I do know it's not, don't aggregate everything, okay? We're not trying to get rid of the flu, right? We've lived with that for a long time. But now we're aggregating it to say all illnesses we're trying to get rid of by putting masks on. And I just think that's wrong. And then, you know, when it comes to looking at, you know, this whole idea of people staying at home and they're just not getting tested, I don't believe that, okay? I have a department of 160 people that I run. I tell them, you have a cold, you have to stay at home. We'll figure that out. So we're working our way through this. I just think you can go too far overboard on what the metric is that you're going to base it off. And then it always goes back to masks. And I always wonder, why masks? And especially cloth masks. They don't work. And so something's got to give. Otherwise, you know, all we're doing is throwing spaghetti against the wall and saying mask, 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 and that's all that's going to work.
Thanks. I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Oh, no,
I
like
appreciate
this
you
stuff,
taking
so
the
no,
time.
it's good. All right.
Thank you, Todd. Come on down. Okay, get your name, please.
Ron Young.
Hi, Ron.
My son goes to school here. I'm old, but I'm 72. My son is 15. Well, I just want to thank Laura for returning my call. It's more than the school board members did. They never contacted me after I emailed them. So, you know, I want to express my disappointment in not being able to meet any of my son's teachers at the open house. Some were home with a sick child, some were all sick. We got to talk to one teacher and one guidance counselor, and that was it. Then we would have to wait an hour, and I was very disappointed. And now you say that you're going to have virtual, virtual meeting with the teachers now in the next couple of weeks. We don't like that. We don't like that at all. And I wish that we could meet the teachers in person, just so you know. And as far as masks go, masks do work. And I have some figures here for you. The Germantown school district has masks optional, and they had Channel 12. This is on Channel 12 News. They had 111 active cases 2 weeks ago. The Greenfield is about the same size. Masks were required there at 12 active cases. Oak Creek Franklin had 79 active cases. They had masks optional. Wauwatosa, masks required at 26 active cases. Waukesha had 192 active cases. They're being sued, as you know, don't you? You know they're being sued. And Milwaukee had 604, masks required at 604 cases, but it's 5 times larger. So, and schools with no masks in place had 3.5 times more outbreaks than schools with mask mandates, according to the Arizona study. So I'm not against wearing masks. All I know is that last year I didn't get a cold, my son didn't even get a cold, which may not even be good, I don't know. But we didn't get sick at all, and I'm here because I got sick this year, shortly after school started, just a few weeks ago. My son came home and started coughing, he couldn't stop. And he's vaccinated for COVID, so am I. My 104-year-old mother is vaccinated. But he couldn't stop. I got sick. I was out for a week. The last day of the summer, I couldn't do anything, which annoyed me. I'm quite angry about it. And, you know, what you do here affects the whole community. And there's other things going around. RSV, for instance, they're admitting 6 to 12 a day at Children's Hospital. You know, with RSV alone, I guess, or other respiratory diseases that put younger children at great risk, clogs up the whole, they can't breathe. So, you know, it's, you know, I'm not against masking. It works, it definitely works. But it only works if everyone's wearing a mask. And, you know, I don't really wear a mask, and I like to see my son wearing a mask. And he doesn't wear it at school here. I'm sure he doesn't wear it, but he's vaccinated. I was ambivalent about it until I got sick. You know, not with COVID, but probably not with COVID. My son was tested and was negative. So that's the thing. And I'm glad you brought up about the liability issue, and I was quite concerned about that. I don't know how good your insurance is here, but a child in I think it was Fort Atkinson died. I don't know if he's 10 or 13 or whatever. And he died, and I don't know if he died of COVID, but he had COVID. So, I mean, I don't want to wait until someone dies, a teacher. You must have immunocompromised students and faculty and staff in these schools, and they're at great risk. You know, they are at great risk. COVID is nothing, it's pretty bad. I mean, I know people who are out for long periods of time. I mean, they can't work anymore. You know, fairly young people, they just can't work. And a lot of these people are listening to this conservative talk show, that three of them have recently died of COVID. Apparently they were too dumb to get vaccinated. And two of them recanted before they died. Said they were wrong or whatever. And think how many people they sent to their grave, you know, just by, you know, not, they were giving false information, like it's all a hoax. So, I mean, that's the way it is. So that's about all I have to say, but I'm concerned about the liability issue too, you know, it's a shame to lose people, you know, to the faculty. I think you should follow the CDC guidelines. I mean, I don't see why you're not, and I think you'll be in trouble if you're not. And two school districts are being sued right now, not for money, but if someone gets seriously ill or dies, you could be sued for money.
Thank you, Ron.
Okay.
All right, with that, we're going to go ahead and proceed with the meeting.